The jury returned a 10-page indictment alleging a wide range of illegal acts by the popular and powerful Clark, who had been sheriff here for 16 years. A writ of impeachment was also returned against the 55-year-old lawman. The wide-ranging indictment alleged neglect of duty, corruption in office, fraud, and using his office for personal gain. One specific charge alleges that Clark took prisoners from the Houston County Jail to Florida and 2 other Alabama counties to work on farms he owned. Indictments for ticket fixing, a theft of a truck, and $6,000 in county funds were also returned by the special grand jury. The investigation also uncovered evidence which led to the indictment of Deputy Sheriff Leon Baxter. The 43-year-old Baxter was charged with perjury in connection with testimony he gave to the grand jury in the Clark probe. The bill of impeachment against Sheriff Clark was sent to the State Attorney General for processing. It will be heard by the State Supreme Court to determine whether Clark is fit to continue to serve in his elected post. ABI agents spent months checking documents and following Clark before enough was gathered to call a special grand jury in the case. The investigation and presentations to the grand jury were supervised by ABI agents and Special Prosecutor Ray Acton. Houston DA Tom Sorrells was reluctant to take part in the case against Clark. So far, he's given no reason for that reluctance. Clark is considered by local citizens to be very popular, and opinions here were supportive of the sheriff, no matter what he's accused of. Some local observers say that's the reason the DA Sorrells recused himself from the case. Even though Clark is charged with the crimes, he is still sheriff until he's either convicted or impeached.
Officials here in Houston County say Sheriff A.B. Clark is the first sheriff ever in this county to be indicted for alleged wrongdoing while in office. They also say there will be turmoil in the Sheriff's Department until the issue of A.B. Clark and the allegations against him are resolved. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News, Dothan, Alabama.
Again, what we're trying to do is keep proper perspective with them, that we don't want people to say, well, if you win the first 2, you're going to be national champions, or if you lose the first 2, you're an also-ran. Not at all. The important thing for us is to play well, keep our young men healthy, and show improvement.
I don't think they're going to be very weak. With a guy like Walker back there and the receivers and quarterback they have, they may control the ball a lot. I hope we get the ball enough to do something with our speed. I disagree. We're awful young on the offensive line, and that's one of his strengths. He has Eddie Weaver and Jimmy Payne, who are 2 of the best linemen in the country. But Vince is a fine coach, and he's not ever going to tell you about all of his good points.
Neither team could move early in the game. It was late in the first quarter before the big break came. The Dothan punt is mishandled on the Carver 7. The Tigers pounce on it, and they're in business. 2 plays later, tailback Willie Williams takes it over from the 4. The point after is wide, and Dothan leads it 6-0 with 8 seconds left in the first quarter. But the Wolverines come right back. A 7-play drive of 79 yards. The big play, a long pass from Kedrick Nutt to tight end Gregory Payne. Good for 52 yards down to the Dothan 26. 4 plays later, James Barnes takes it over from the 4. The point after is good. Carver leads it 7-6. The next time the Wolverines get the ball, they score again. A 79-yard drive in 7 plays. The TD coming on a Nutt to Mark Knox pass. The point after is again good. 14-6 Carver. Dothan mounts a scoring drive right before the half. The Tigers go 57 yards in 8 plays, aided by a big interference call at the 4. Williams scores from the very next play. The try for 2 is no good, and at half, Carver has a 14-12 lead over Dothan. In the second half, Dothan got the big break early. An intercepted Carver pass by Steve Butler is returned to the Wolverine 20. Williams rambles it in from 20 yards out. The Tigers missed the try for 2, but they take the lead 18-14, and that's where it stands at the end of 3. Dothan drives again to the Carver 21. On comes Lee Ray Marshall. He kicks a 36-yard field goal. Dothan ups their lead to 21-14. Dothan adds another field goal late in the fourth quarter. Marshall doing the honors again. It's 24-14, and Carver gets a late touchdown, but it's not enough. The try for 2 is no good. The final score, Dothan 24 and Carver 20. From Cramden Bowl, Rick Pons reporting for WSFA TV Sports.
It's time for Alabama hysteria. That's when the football season gets underway officially. During that time, there's football on TV, on radio, and at stadiums all across this and other states. The games bring in hundreds of thousands of dollars for the school's fielding teams. Those players who excel are treated like kings and can go on to the pro ranks and sometimes live like kings on the huge salaries negotiated with big-time pro football teams. The game also causes other action among fans, big-time gambling to the tune of millions of dollars every year in illegal bets by Alabamians. Law enforcement sources who ask not to be identified say the big money is bet on these two teams in Alabama, the Crimson Tide and the Auburn Tigers. Our sources say bookies in this state are connected to organized crime gambling syndicates. This is how it works, I'm told. The bet is placed in Montgomery. The bookie then either calls his syndicate connection in Birmingham or Atlanta or New Orleans to lay off or transfer the big bets to larger bookmakers. State and federal law enforcement officials know that the largest bets usually are phoned in to Las Vegas. For those familiar with Montgomery gambling circles, bets can be placed at some local barber shops and beauty shops, as well as taverns and nightclubs. This is big-time gambling, where bets can range from $500 to $10,000 on a single game. I'm told that some local doctors and lawyers bet heavily on Alabama, and the next biggest bets are ways on professional games, especially the Super Bowl. To confirm the big money betting on football in this community, the Cumberland Capital case is just a guide. The Cumberland Capital was a commercial Montgomery loan company. Its manager ended up in court charged with embezzlement. Some say the figure was $1 million. Others say it was $500,000. Authorities say the manager used the money to pay off huge gambling debts, all involving college football. Michael Beers, a local attorney, prosecuted the case.
He became involved with this particular individual in 1975, and that he began to make weekend football bets, Saturday afternoon college football, Sunday afternoon professional football bets with this individual. He became consistent at making these bets and also consistent at losing.
We've learned that there's little or no enforcement of federal or state gambling laws here in Alabama because police say it's time-consuming and the lawbreakers end up back on the street as soon as they pay a small fine. And so the big games begin this weekend, and so does big gambling. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News reporting.
Holman Prison sits about 6 miles northwest of Atmore, Alabama, a small town near the Florida state line. Last Sunday, what prison officials call a near riot broke out at Holman. It involved 150 inmates and left 4 men wounded. But Tate says this isn't the first violence at Holman.
We've had several instances of violence in the Atmore area at both of these prisons down at Holman and Fountain earlier this month. I think this is about the 4th incident of where knives were used. However, we have not had any that we could term racially motivated.
Tate says perhaps one reason violence is a problem at Holman is that the prisoners are more confined than at other state facilities. Tate says at other state prisons, all inmates are required to work regular 8-hour shifts, not only helping to raise revenue to pay for their own upkeep, but leaving them too tired to start many fights. But it's not that way at Holman.
Holman is different from any prison that we have anyway. We don't have that many inmates leaving the institution for work, whereas across the street at Fountain, they're out working in the farm fields and what have you, like they are up here at Draper and Staten. Inmates are in maximum security. They can't get out.
But Tate says plans to build more housing for state prisoners may be part of the cure for prison violence. Tate says he hopes the removal of 24 inmates described as troublemakers from Holman is another part of the solution. But it's unknown whether last week's outbreak was the end of a building pressure or the start of new troubles. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Day before yesterday, I was walking out past this big plum tree. I usually keep a close notice on what's going on with my trees because of insects that are a constant problem. I looked down at the ground and lo and behold, I saw the biggest mushroom that I've ever seen. On close examination of it, it wasn't just an ordinary wild mushroom. is what is commonly called a puffball.
This puffball, which Jim hasn't yet decided what he'll name it, is not only unusual because of its size, but also because of where it grew. The plum tree shadowed the fungus, preventing little sunlight or spectator attention, and so it was quite by accident that Jim discovered and would immediately know what this thing was. Well, now, this isn't your ordinary everyday puffball, so of course it had to be measured, and it's 8 inches in diameter and 6 inches long. Compare that to neighboring toadstools. Jim says the puffball has fully matured, and even as he and I were examining it, some of the white spots darkened, a continuing sign, Jim says, of its growth. And just in case you may be thinking that Jim papier-mâchéed the mushroom, think again. Jim is a biologist and plans to germinate it and reproduce others. Maybe he'll eat the next bunch, since puffballs make good desserts. Kim Davis, WSFA, TV News.
Well, Gina, primarily the problem is twofold. I think, first of all, we on the commission.
Bill, and said, based on the history of your phone bill, your rates are going to be so much. Now, if you begin to use it substantially,
With the quarterback I think that they have, and Rich, I'm sure they will put the ball up in there. They're going to utilize, I guess, his abilities to the most, and he's a great passer. And I just hope that we can get a good pass rush from our people up front, make him throw the ball quick, and hope that we play the type of game that I think we're capable of playing back there, and hopefully we can pick off a few.
When you're out there slalom skiing, you have to make consistent turns, you have to make even pulls through the wakes. You have to constantly be thinking about keeping an edge from buoy to buoy, never letting the ski ride flat, always keeping the ski on edge so you have complete control of it all the time. Mainly because you have to fight against the boat, because it's a direct competition between you and the boat, because the boat is pulling against you. It's not as if snow skiing just going down a slope or something. You actually have to compensate for an outside force.
The Horned Frogs of TCU drew first blood in the game following a fumble by Auburn quarterback Charles Thomas on the Tigers' first possession of the ball game. The Auburn defense shut down the Horned Frogs, who had to settle for 3 points. The Tigers rallied back in their second possession due partly to this outstanding pass and run combination that goes from Thomas to number 1 split end Chris Woods. Woods carries the ball down to the Horned Frogs' 5-yard line for a pickup of 48 yards. A couple of plays later, freshman fullback Ron O'Neal takes it in from the 1, and Auburn goes up by 4 points as Del Greco splits the uprights. And the first quarter ends with the score Auburn 7, TCU 3. The spark plug fullback for Auburn, Ron O'Neal, was hemmed up for the most part in the first quarter, but ignited the Tigers in the second quarter with this run from the 25-yard line. O'Neal rambles through the line, then explodes into the secondary and carries it in for a touchdown. Auburn goes out in front 14-3. The Horned Frogs return the favor on their next possession when speedster Marcus Gilbert goes through the line with only one man that has a shot on him, right cornerback Johnny Cheeks. He misses. Gilbert sprints 80 yards for a touchdown. That makes the score Auburn 14, TCU 10. Auburn and TCU trade downs, then freshman fullback Ron O'Neal sets up Auburn's next score with this scamper down to the 6-yard line. Auburn catches TCU sleeping on the next play as quarterback Charles Thomas hits split end Chris Woods, who lined up far to the right for a touchdown. That's the way the half ends. 21-10, Auburn out in front. TCU added another touchdown in the third quarter, and Del Greco hit a field goal, making the final score the Auburn Tigers 24, TCU 16. Reporting from Auburn, Don Phelps, WSFA TV Sports.
Well, did you think you'd play as much as you ended up playing today?
No, sure didn't.
Well, when Mike had to go out, when did you know that you were going to have to play the ball game?
About 3 minutes before the game, before we walked out.
Well, offensive line did a good job today. You know, I'm proud of them. I guess they deserve most of the credit.
I think Bob Hicks did a tremendous job today.
We did some good things today. We did some bad things that we got to correct. Just take away 2 plays, and we had a pretty good day.
That's going to help us more than anything this season, is have this week off, so let our offensive line regroup.
We enjoyed it. We got around the football, and we created situations in the game instead of sitting back and waiting on them to happen. And I think it just proved that we've gotten a little bit more aggressive.
Oh, yeah, it sure feels good to have somebody, defending us like they did today. And they pulled us out of the trenches, like I said earlier, several times, which is going to help us win down the road.
Maybe you all can pay the favor back down the road, huh?
Oh, yeah.
The guys out there, the TCU, I got to give it to them. They play pretty hard football.
Looks like you started something you can build on today.
I hope so. We got off to a slow start, with that big play, but, we came back and shut them out and won the game.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
7 minutes into the game, the Auburn Tigers found themselves trailing the TCU Horned Frogs 3-0. Then Auburn starting quarterback Charles Thomas teams up with split end Chris Woods for a pass-run combination that carries Auburn down to the TCU 5-yard line. A couple of plays later, fullback Ron O'Neal takes it over from the 1. Al Greco hits the point after, and it's Auburn on top 7-3. Freshman fullback Ron O'Neal's rallied the Tigers in the second quarter. O'Neal, who found the going tough in the first 15 minutes, rips through the line here, breaking tackles and carries himself into the end zone. The Tigers take a 14-3 lead. TCU battles back on the next series of downs when speedster Marcus Gilbert breaks through the line almost untouched. Cornerback Johnny Cheeks takes a shot at him, but it's off to the races for Gilbert, who romps into the end zone for an 80-yard run that moves TCU within 4 points. Halfway through the second quarter, Ron O'Neal sets up another Auburn score when he takes the handoff from Thomas and carries it all the way down to the 6-yard line. Then Thomas teams up with Woods, who lined up far to the right, and he's all by himself in the end zone for the winning score, making it Auburn 21-10 over TCU. Auburn's defense came up with several big plays to stall TCU's offense deep in their own territory, but the final score wound up being Auburn 24, TCU 16. Reporting from Auburn, Don Phelps, WSFA TV Sports.
advise them to hold their position there. I'll check with them shortly.
Mrs. Henry prefers calling it community TV. Still in its formative stages, it's uncertain what community TV will or won't be able to do in the upcoming years. Basically, it's a small television station with a limited broadcast range, sort of like ham radio. But Mrs. Henry thinks these small stations present large opportunities. She became interested in community television about 8 months ago. Since then, she and her corporation, Southern Women's Voices, have applied to the Federal Communications Commission for licenses for community TV stations across the nation, including one in Montgomery, where she hopes to present alternative programming to that offered by larger stations.
I would be interested in providing programming for women and for children. I believe that women, for instance, do not have adequate programming on the weekends during the daytime. I believe oftentimes on Monday night when there's so much football that women might prefer another type of programming, and I intend to meet those needs. There is a market out there. We have targeted ourselves to that market, and I think we've got a real good chance of pulling it off.
Mrs. Henry says it will cost about $50,000 to construct and operate a community station for 3 months, and she's currently arranging financing for her Montgomery station. All of her plans, though, hinge on whether or not the FCC will grant a license for the station. That decision should come in February. If they do, a new tower may go up on top of Capitol Towers in Montgomery, broadcasting community television all over the city, and if Mrs. Henry has her way, revolutionizing television as we know it. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Went to the zoo today, out to the park this afternoon, family picnic tomorrow.
Well, just sit down and enjoy and take it easy.
Just relaxing and, having a good time.
Well, we're going to cook out tomorrow.
Cook out?
Right, have some chicken.
No, I'm going to clean up and stuff and lay down in my bed and watch TV and stuff, that's all.
Uh-huh.
Alabama's first score was set up when they recovered an LSU fumble on the 47-yard line. Then fullback Kenny Simons from Montgomery goes over his right tackle, breaks a tackle, and outruns a secondary with his 9.6 speed, and Alabama goes up by 7 with a 51-yard touchdown run. On the first play of the second quarter, 3rd down and 15 to go for a first down. Quarterback Walter Lewis sets up the next score when he draws in the defense, goes back up the middle, and carries it all the way down to the LSU 7-yard line. The LSU defense then stiffens, and Peter Kim is called in. He puts the Tide up by 10 points. Quarterback Ken Coley sets up the next score when he fakes a handoff and then goes over right tackle, breaks several more tackles, and carries the ball all the way down to the 28-yard line. Coley goes out for a breather, and several plays later, Walter Lewis fakes to the inside and goes outside on a 3rd and goal-to-goal situation. He hits pay dirt, and Alabama goes up 17-0 at the half. Both teams get bogged down in the 3rd quarter. Alabama scores one more time in the 4th period, and finally, LSU freshman quarterback Timmy Bird finds Malcolm Scott in the end zone to avoid a shutout. The final score, Alabama 24, LSU 7. Don Phelps, WSFA TV Sports.
The cars in that parking lot behind me are from all over. People have driven here from miles around on this hot Labor Day holiday, looking for bargains, hoping to save money on anything and everything from blue jeans to baby clothes. They come in all shapes, sizes, and all ages, young and old. Many arrive when the doors open and are still here when they close, searching through the racks for their size, hoping to find that particular item at half price. Most are looking for bargains, but you'd be surprised just how many people don't know exactly what they're looking for until they get here. What are you looking for today? Anything in particular, or are you just looking around?
Just looking around.
Are you looking for anything in particular, or are you just looking for a good buy?
Looking for something like this I have on. It's been hectic and very hot.
You're going to save some money today?
Well, maybe a little.
Is it worth fighting the crowds and all the traffic to come to this mall on a busy day like today?
Not to me, it isn't.
Mobs doesn't bother you, because where the mobs are, that's where the good prices are.
But what about the store clerks? How do they feel about the mad rush? Do you look forward to big sales like this?
Oh,
or
yeah.
Is it exciting?
Mm-hmm.
How's business been today?
Fantastic. It's been very good.
Crowds or no crowds, there are those who enjoy the thrill of victory and who don't seem to mind suffering the shopping war.
And I'll be here next year at the same time.
Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
No longer in control of what flies in the sky, air traffic controllers now have plenty of time to talk about how they became unemployed and how they feel their futures look. Members of the Montgomery local PATCO and several other locals spent their Labor Day eating barbecued chicken, hot dogs, and all of the other condiments that make a picnic what it is. These air traffic controllers, like 12,000 others across the country, were fired by President Reagan August 3rd when they voted not to back down on a strike aimed at better wages and working conditions. Group to group, the conversation ultimately turned toward the semantics of the right to work, the violation of the non-strike agreement, and the safety and feasibility of the federal government making air traffic control work without them. Off the job for a month now, all at this gathering haven't given up and are optimistic that when Congress reconvenes, they'll get their jobs back. Until then, there are a number of what appear to be insurmountable obstacles to cross, like keeping the kids fed, having kids, and hoping the Rock of Gibraltar stand the Reagan administration has taken on the PATCO strike will be short-lived. Believing in their right to negotiate an equitable contract for their labors, these PATCO members appear to believe Labor Day means as much for them as it does for those who are employed today. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
The Maudens have both retired, Mrs. Mauden from the nursing profession and her husband, once employed in the wholesale business. They recently celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary and today spend most of their time tending to house and yard work. They've done practically everything together over the years, raising 7 children and enjoying 22 grandchildren and 9 great-grandchildren. And it was the Maldens who, 15 years ago, journeyed to the federal courthouse in Selma to register to vote. Little did they know then that they'd be the first black couple in the South to register under the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and they both would be voting ever since.
Oh, just about, I laughed and said, about 2 minutes, just like that. And so we went on out and got in the car and left. So later on, you know, they mailed me my certificate. Yes. So we didn't, also my husband, so we were notified, both of us were notified that we were registered voters.
In Washington, there's a battle over extending that same act. Mrs. Malden is hopeful Congress will agree to continue the historic piece of legislation.
You take, the black has had such hard times in trying to register to vote, and I think it would be a sin for people who have lost their lives for the things that they believe in and wanted, and then that you will let it die.
The Maldens have kept fond memories of the early civil rights days, although neither participated in any marches or got a chance to meet Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Mrs. Malden was promised a copy of a gold replica of the voting certificate given to then-President Lyndon Johnson. She never received her copy, but she isn't bitter because she did get her chance to vote. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News, Selma. That's what both Davises, who are not related, have been doing ever since 4 o'clock last Friday, Margaret with one hand and Donald with two. They both braved near 100-degree heat in the parking lot and the quiet, lonesome early morning hours. Margaret says the 3 hours before sunrise were the toughest, while Donald's supporters kept reminding him to hang on in there. They both had different styles of holding on and different reasons for entering the contest.
I got a letter from my college reunion, 25th reunion class about a month ago, and we're having a reunion in October, and on the bottom of the letter they said, please write down here and send it in before you come, the craziest thing you've done since you went to college. And I couldn't think of anything crazy. And then the very next week they called me to come and be in this crazy thing, and I decided that was the perfect thing to put in my college crazy letter.
Well, I was wanting to win a pickup truck for our youth group at church.
Each contestant got a 5-minute break every hour and a 15-minute rest every 3 hours. They could sit, stand, eat, or read, just as long as they kept at least one hand on the truck at all times. When it was all over, it was Margaret who held on the longest, 69 hours and 45 minutes. Several spectators who gathered to witness the contest didn't think it was a bit crazy, but as one spectator observed, I don't think I'd want a truck that bad. Kim Davis, WSFA, TV News.
First time I carried the ball, he hit me, you know. He said, that's you, fat boy, welcome to the college football, you know. And I said, well, you know, I'll be back.
There was a welcome home sign out for James Brady when he came home for the first time since he was shot 5 months ago. After spending almost 11 hours with his family, Brady, nicknamed the Bear, gave the thumbs up sign as he left the way he came, by wheelchair and with a nurse.
Good to be home, Jim?
It sure is good to be home.
Okay, now we can let it down.
To be up there in food corner after 20 weeks.
Mrs. Brady said her husband had spent a very quiet day, eating lunch and a barbecue dinner. It was lovely, she said. We are so thankful for the day. Susan Peterson, NBC News, Washington.
This auditorium is filled with Montgomery area teachers who each day face all kinds of school problems, most of which can be dealt with. But one problem that is not so easy to deal with is drug abuse. They're listening to this man, Dr. Stephen Glenn from the Family Developmental Institute in Washington, D.C. Besides his work with the Institute, Dr. Glenn is also an advisor to President Reagan and an international leader in the field of discipline and parenting education. Dr. Glenn is in Montgomery on behalf of the Parent Resources and Information for Drug Education organization known as PRIDE. Dr. Glenn says the root of most parent, child, and teacher problems which lead to drug abuse begin at home.
Biggest barrier in education today is that we have failed to structure home and early school experiences so that it taught responsibility and self-discipline. And without those things, you can't educate a child. What's happening with our kids is exactly what happened with 12 million housewives a decade ago. We put them in a place they didn't want to be for reasons they didn't understand, doing things they didn't want to do for rewards they weren't sure mattered, and 12 million of them turned to tranquilizers, booze to get them through the day.
Dr. Glenn says the drug problem in the schools can be controlled if the right steps are taken.
Today we feel it's quite reversible if we agree between home and school to get back to the basics of discipline, judgment, responsibility, developed early and reinforced, that make all the rest of a child's education relevant and make him able to meet those expectations.
Dr. Glenn says students are turning away from marijuana use and are now turning to alcohol and speed as the more popular abusers. Tomorrow, Dr. Glenn will address a group of Montgomery area parents at the Civic Center downtown. Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
The arraignment proceeding took nearly 30 minutes. When Judge Truman Hobbs asked Riddle how he pled, Riddle said guilty and stood motionlessly as Judge Hobbs read the indictment charges against him. During the proceeding, Riddle told the judge, while serving as a Talga County school superintendent, he agreed with sales representatives of Phillips Supply Company to use his influence in getting contracts for the school system to purchase supplies from the Gaston-based firm. Riddle says that agreement would mean he'd receive kickbacks, and to the best of his recollection, Riddle says he got from $6,000 to $7,000. Riddle says there were 6 instances of bid rigging involved, and that all bids, which were handled through the mail, had been agreed to be rigged. Riddle says he fully understood his guilty plea and the 1-count indictment of conspiracy and mail fraud. Sentencing was delayed 30 days for Riddle, who faces a possible 5 years in prison and a maximum fine of $10,000 or both. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
All proceeds go to benefit the Alabama Sheriff's Boys and Girls Ranches, which provide a home for hundreds of children who wouldn't have a home otherwise. These are my Alabama kids, and we're counting on you to help.
Alabama's 3 juvenile centers provide education for the kids kept there, but as Peggy Goodwin of the Department of Youth Services pointed out, it's survival education for kids who, for the most part, are far behind their peers. Representative Bob Patton says part of the problem is that the system is funded as if a stepchild of the overall educational system. Ms. Goodwin suggested that creating the DYS education system as a separate school district would help, particularly in transferring to local schools credits earned in the DYS centers once the juveniles are released. But Dr. C.C. Baker, the state school board, pointed out that the DYS system isn't accredited, and bringing it into accreditation would require a number of changes in the DYS approach to education. The committee indicated an interest in finding some solutions to the dilemma. The committee also looked at the auditing procedures for county and city school systems. It was pointed out that the county school systems are checked by the Department of Examiners of Public Accounts, but because of staffing shortages, those audits are as much as 4 years behind. City school systems hire their own auditors locally, but don't necessarily have to check for compliance with state laws. The committee wants to investigate methods to have both county and city systems audited annually, but the examiner's department said it would take an extra $720,000 a year to beef up their staff such that they could handle the audits. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The Embers is one of several lounges in Montgomery that a city council ad hoc committee is concerned about. Council President Willie Peake says the Embers has gotten a number of complaints from residents, and the police have answered 215 calls there in 19 months. Local attorney Warren Reese, who represents the Embers, says the owners hired a security service in April to improve the conditions. He says since that time the police have answered only 4 calls. But Montgomery Police Chief Charles Swindle says the problem with the Embers isn't the clientele, but the owners. He says, quote, Mr. and Mrs. Nick Nikolic get involved with and even start many of the fights out there, unquote. Swindle says on one occasion, Mrs. Nikolic tried to prevent a police officer from stopping a fight, and says on another it took almost 6 carloads of police officers to get the Nikolics under control. Chief Swindle says if the Nikolics don't bow out and let the police do their jobs, he'll put them in jail. The council asks that the Nikolics meet with the police department and other city officials to clear up some of the establishment's problems. Then at the end of a 60-day period, the owners will come before the council for further review. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News. It took Councilman Joe Reed 3 separate tries before the City Council to get the project approved, but the 3rd try proved successful when the Council approved reprogramming $48,000 in unobligated community development funds for the project. Several residents from the Carter Hill Road area spoke out against the sidewalks. W.J. Williams presented the council with a petition signed by residents who don't want sidewalks. Williams says only one person wants them, and that person owns a business. He says there's already a sidewalk on the north side, so there's no need for one on the south side. Williams says the residents have been, quote, humiliated, browbeaten, and intimidated by Reed, and he asked the council if there's any way to recall or impeach a council member. But Council President Willie Peake says the only way that can be done is through the election process. Reed says the sidewalks aren't a frivolous or misguided thought on his behalf. He says it's just a situation where a couple of constituents disagree with a public official. He says he's not angry at any of the residents, but says he has a responsibility to look out for the entire community. Then the council voted 5-3 in favor of the sidewalks. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The Thunderbirds, the Air Force demonstration team, had performed over the Labor Day weekend at the National Air Show at Cleveland's Burke Lakefront Airport. This morning, they were leaving for another air show in Wichita Falls, Texas.
This morning, because of the weather, we were taking off in 2-ship formations.
In plane number 1, Lieutenant Colonel David Smith, who's been the commander and leader of the Thunderbirds for 3 years, and his crew chief, Staff Sergeant Dwight Roberts. The T-38 jet trainer was taking off at 185 miles per hour when a bird was apparently sucked into a jet.
He was just airborne and the right side engine flamed out, and just a big tongue of fire came out the back end. And then the 2 men, the pilot and the crew chief, both ejected. The crew chief got out and his chute deployed. The pilot's chute never opened, and he landed out here on the rocks. The plane just crossed the end of the runway and blew up, went into the lake.
Emergency crews rushed to the scene immediately. They found Colonel Smith near the runway and took him to a nearby hospital. The 40-year-old native of Rossville, Georgia, the father of 2, was pronounced dead on arrival.
Crew chief came down about 3/4 of the way down the runway, and he was all right. They took him to the hospital to be checked out. His chute opened. The pilot just never had a chance. His chute never opened.
Lieutenant Colonel D.L. Smith, the commander-leader of the Thunderbirds, died this morning after ejecting from his aircraft.
Other members of the Thunderbird team were shocked. They canceled their trip to the air show in Texas.
This was the 14th accident in the 29-year history of the Air Force Thunderbirds. The last fatality came during an air show at Hill Air Force Base in Utah last May 9th.
An Air Force board will investigate this mishap, but the chief of the Air Force Tactical Air Command says a flock of birds was sucked into the jet of the plane, causing the flameout. but they probably will not know for sure until they pull the plane from Lake Erie and examine the wreckage.
San Diego was leading Cleveland 10-7 in the second quarter when Chuck Muncy powered in from 9 yards out. That gave the Chargers a 17-7 lead on their way to a 20-7 halftime advantage. The Chargers kept it going in the second half. Dan Fouts, who passed for 330 yards, hit James Brooks on a 13-yard swing pass. It was 27-7 San Diego. The Browns made an effort to get back in the game when Brian Stipe's fourth down touchdown pass to Greg Pruitt cut the margin to 27-14. That's when Fouts went to work, putting Cleveland away for good. He opened the next possession with his 51-yard pass to Charlie Joyner, who caught 6 for 191 yards during the night. That was followed by this 5-yard touchdown flip to Hank Bauer, to the displeasure of Cleveland coach Sam Rutigliano and the liking of San Diego boss Don Coryell. Fouts' 19th and final completion covered 38 yards as he and Ron Smith finished the scoring. The San Diego Chargers beat the Cleveland Browns in a strong 44-14 showing.
It's hard for us to believe that we won't have at least one more tomorrow, especially if we're young, but we may not. And keeping this in mind, it's also important to remember that we all need a written legal will, no matter what our financial or marital status.
Some people think that because they have no assets, that there's no need to write a will, when what a will does is it is a plan for the disposition of future as well as present assets.
The first thing to do is make a commitment now. If a husband and wife are the same age, chances are she'll outlive him. Careful planning will prepare her to deal with the property and money. Next, line up the right advisors. Several types of professionals may have to be consulted. Step 3 is to gather the facts. Together, the husband and wife can accumulate documents like trust agreements, powers of attorney, birth certificates, marriage license, deeds of all kinds, insurance papers, and more. These will help your advisor to draw up your financial profile. It can suggest ways to save money or rearrange spending patterns in the event of the death of a spouse. Once this is done, pinpoint problems and solutions. Wills are basic. Whether you know it or not, you already have one. Either you write one to dispose of your property the way you want, or the state writes a default will dictating who gets your estate. The last step is to review your estate plans yearly to update or revise. State law requires signatures from 2 witnesses to make a will legal in Alabama, and all wills must be written. However, exceptions can be made for soldiers or people with estates totaling less than $500. Another important tip is to keep your will in a safe place and to let someone, your executor or a family member, know where it is. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News. Mount Meigs has 3 dorms. 2 have a capacity of 34, the other one 32. But today there are 33 more students than there are beds. The overflow students sleep in cots or on pallets on the floor. Officials here say the overcrowded conditions are dangerous, but they say it's an old problem without a new solution.
We've got limited capacity, and we're getting more kids committed to the institutions, to the Department of Youth Services, than we've had before. And we've always had the problem. For years, we've been putting Band-Aids on everything, and you know, we're trying to convince the legislature every year is the Department of Youth Services really needs more money. Is just like hitting a stone wall.
Patton says right now there are 100 kids backlogged in county jails who've been sentenced and are waiting to be evaluated at Mount Meigs. But he says since there's no room or money, many of those kids will be let out on the street without treatment. The board in a special meeting approved a budget for the coming year with an option to maintain the diagnostic and evaluation program for 4 months. After that, if there's still no money coming in, the board can vote to halt D&E. That would leave more than $400,000 and balance the budget. In the meantime, Board Director George Pfeiffer is working out a plan to specify just how many students can safely occupy a dorm. Once this is done, intake will be limited and more students will be backlogged in county jails. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
It was the kind of advice which the governor, legislature, citizens, and members of the conference could use in order for the state to successfully compete and continue to grow in the 80s. For the governor, Blunt suggested strengthening Alabama's recruitment and landing international investments here, and for the state to increase its exports overseas. He says several southern states are making active foreign investments. For example, Blunt says for every dollar Virginia spent in overseas investments, it gained $30. Although Blunt says he isn't criticizing the governor's handling of foreign affairs, he did say it's time to set specific goals and commitments in overseas investments. For the legislature, Blunt says it needs to eliminate the co-employee liability law, which limits employees of some companies as to whom they may sue if injured on the job. Blunt says several industries decided not to locate in Alabama directly because of that law. Alabama citizens also play a role in state growth. Blunt says we must make sacrifices and consider paying higher taxes, taxes which will fund future diverse industry. And for conference members, Blunt predicts future changes in the industry.
Powerful changes will confront Alabama and the nation in the 1980s, and how we adjust to those changes and how we adapt our policies to accommodate them will determine the rate and the quality of our growth. It is therefore imperative that we plan ahead, plan for this growth and development.
Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
It is clear that the public opposes massive funding increases in the public sector. For example, many industries are being proposed daycare services. A federal policy which emphasizes economic growth is
priorities to cooperate with the state.
Defined by the states.
Montgomery Airport Director Ken Muse says Danley lost 7,770 seats a month because of the change in schedule and the termination of Atlantic Southeast Airlines. Delta Airlines has cut its noon flight to Atlanta, so now there are 5 flights to Atlanta, leaving Montgomery at 7 a.m., 9:33, 3:10, 6:15, and 9:50. Some other changes include a 10:03 p.m. flight from Montgomery to Baton Rouge, Dallas, and Phoenix, a 12:40 a.m. flight from Montgomery to Shreveport, and the Las Vegas, Dallas, Baton Rouge flight arriving in Montgomery at 9:21 p.m. Muse says the changes are necessary because of a decrease in the number of available landing slots in Atlanta as a result of the air traffic controller strike. He says in August the airport lost almost $10,000 because of the strike. Muse says that's a 25% decrease over last year's August figures. The other Montgomery airline, Republic, plans to keep its same local schedule, with 4 flights in and out of Montgomery each day. But Republic station manager David Jamar says the airline will have a system change in late October. Muse says even with these changes, Danley Field has enough flights for the current volume of air traffic. He says when the economy gets better and more air traffic controllers are trained, more flights will probably be added. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The former three-time governor married Miss Taylor early today at a Prattville home of Watauga County probate judge Jim Corley, who performed the civil ceremony. Corley is a close personal friend and a longtime political associate of 62-year-old Wallace. The new Mrs. Wallace, shown here in some old photographs, first became associated with Wallace in the late 1960s when he campaigned for president. She and a sister were country music singers in his campaign. The new bride once taught school in Montgomery for a short time, then moved back to Jasper when her marriage to a military officer ended. There was no formal announcement about the marriage, and details about the ceremony were not learned until late this afternoon. The Wallace family would not comment on when and where the wedding took place. A member of the governor's security staff said that Wallace was not ready to comment on the marriage. We asked the former governor's son why the secrecy.
Well, I think, Don, that's a question you probably would need to ask my father. I know you would, but a marriage is a very personal matter, and obviously that was his wish and Lisa's wish, but I think that question would better be directed at him.
The young Wallace did say he was very happy about the marriage.
Well, of course, I'm very happy about his marriage, as are the rest of the members of my family. We have known Lisa a good while, and those of her family, and we're very impressed with her family, and we think the world of Lisa. We're all very happy. We're elated about the marriage.
The governor's former wife of 7 years, Cornelia Wallace, said she wasn't aware of the wedding until she was contacted by reporters this morning.
When you've been married to someone a long time, you're always concerned about their welfare and happiness. And I hope that he has at last found some peace in his personal life, and I wish him all the luck in the world.
Friends and family members refused to comment about the honeymoon plans for the newlyweds. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Pushing to have the process completed as quickly as possible, committee co-chairman Rick Manley urged the members to get their plans turned in so they can be compared to see if they'll all fit together and then written into bill form. Manley says they've asked Governor James to call them into special session to act on the proposal September 29th at 4 p.m., hoping to complete the legislative approval within 2 weeks. A representative and a senator from each congressional district have been working with other legislators in their area to devise the new lines. In Montgomery, Senator Cordy Taylor has been working on the lines and says he's drafted a plan that has been agreed to by Montgomery's delegation. Theoretically, if all of the districts were evenly divided, each would contain about 37,000 people.
Looking at the map, the colored areas are the current districts. The red lines represent the proposed districts. Cecil Wyatt's district appears colored orange, and he appears to have given up the most territory in arriving at the 37,000 constituent figure. Since his district was so large due to population growth over the last decade, much of his area extending down into the county was turned over to Representative Bill Edwards in District 83. The purple area currently belongs to Prattville's Ed Gruby, but under the proposed plan, it would also go to Edwards. Montgomery's Alvin Holmes in District 80 has stretched down into part of Wyatt's territory, Gruby's territory, and it gives up part of his current territory to Edwards. District 77 Representative Charles Langford shrinks some as he too gives some of his current territory to Edwards. He picks up some of Holmes' territory and some of Dixon's territory to make up his proposed district. Dixon will also have to give up some territory to Holmes's new proposed territory, but he picks up some of Cecil Wyatt's old district to make up his new proposed district. In District 79, Bob McKee drops one small area to Cecil Wyatt's new proposed area, but he picks up a large section of Langford's area, which includes the Gunner Industrial Park. Senatorial districts are made up of 3 House districts, so now that the proposed House districts in Montgomery have been established, Senator Cordy Taylor will represent 2 House districts southwest of the city, as well as the constituents in District 83. Senator Bishop Barron would represent constituents who are also in Districts 80, 81, and 79. Senator Don Harrison would represent constituents in House District 77, 78, and one other district outside the Montgomery area.
This entire plan will be incorporated into the overall state plan. Taylor says he doesn't expect his local plan to be changed, but he says nothing's ever certain. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
The former three-time governor married Miss Taylor early today at a Prattville home of Watauga County probate judge Jim Corley, who performed the civil ceremony. Corley is a close personal friend and a longtime political associate of 62-year-old Wallace. The new Mrs. Wallace first became associated with Wallace in the late 1960s when he campaigned for president. She and a sister were country music singers in his campaign. The new bride once taught school in Montgomery for a short time, then moved back to Jasper when her marriage to a military officer ended. There was no formal announcement about the marriage, and details about the ceremony were not learned until late this afternoon. The Wallace family would not comment on when and where the wedding took place. A member of the governor's security staff said that Wallace was not ready to comment on the marriage. We asked the former governor's son why the secrecy.
Well, I think, Don, that's a question you probably would need to ask my father. I know you would, but a marriage is a very personal matter, and obviously that was his wish and Lisa's wish, but I think that question would better be directed at him.
The young Wallace did say he was very happy about the marriage.
Well, of course, I'm very happy about his marriage, as are the rest of the members of my family. We have known Lisa a good while, and those of her family, and we're very impressed with her family, and we think the world of Lisa. We're all very happy. We're elated about the marriage.
The governor's former wife of 7 years, Cornelia Wallace, said she wasn't aware of the wedding until she was contacted by reporters this morning.
When you've been married to someone a long time, you're always concerned about their welfare and happiness.